Hello again, class, and thank you for your patience. My video stopped unexpectedly at about right around the end of our To His Coy Mistress discussion, so I will pick up where I left off. Remember, fact one, premise one, if we had forever, I'd wait forever. Premise two, we don't have forever, and we're going to die, and with our death will our passion and our lust die as well. Therefore, stanza three, conclusion. Now, right? We left off of that. Essentially, right? Um, Let us roll all our strength and all our sweetness up into one ball, and tear our pleasures with rush strife through the iron gates of life. Chastity belt reference. Thus, though we cannot make our sun stand still, yet we will make him run. So rather than wait, let's speed time up. In the immortal words of Marvin Gaye, let's get it on. So it's interesting how the double entendres, right, the words with double meanings, um, are very mild euphemisms as opposed to if you compare, well, contrast as well, descriptions of people trying to persuade people to have a romantic engagement with them in modern songs and hip hop songs. It's not understatement, it's hyperbole. It's too much information. It's too much. Whereas here he's trying to kind of use understatement and euphemism, which reflects the milieu, which reflects the time period. Over 400 years ago, right around 400 years ago. This was, Andrew Marvell trying to persuade his mistress with emotional appeals to sleep with him. So it's an interesting argument, and it's a more lighthearted poem. The next poem, on the other hand, Dulce et Decorum Est, and the old lie is what it ends with. And when you read it, it's extremely graphic about the effects of poisonous gas during the war, and what makes this poem so poignant. If you look at the biographical note, Wilfred Owen, died on the battlefield in the last week of World War I at the age of 25. So he wrote this poem about the battle, and he died the last week. And essentially, based on the facts that he presents in the poem, right? My friend, you would not tell with such high zest to children ardent for some desperate glory the old lie, dulce et decorum est pro patria more. Yet another piece of literature that teaches us about the human experience, and very poignant, very poignant. As we're moving forward with the terms, the remainder of the reading focused on the idea of statistical generalizations. This is the deal. It's not just words that can be manipulated. People can also manipulate numbers. And a lot of times when you see polls or surveys or reports, how has the information possibly been manipulated is something to consider. So, as the book tells us, the first thing, when you're evaluating a statistical generalization, as it says on page 176, criteria. What are the standards we're going to judge it by? Okay, the first one is the size must be adequate. On page 177, it describes the first feature of the sample. The proportion of those in the sample must be sufficient to reflect the total size of the target population. So the sample must have an adequate size, number one. If they just do a small group of people and they know that those people are going to answer the questions the way they want, they can use that. But that's not an adequate size. So size, number one. Number two, it must be representative. What does that mean? It needs to be random, and it needs to be spread. So all the significant differences within the population need to be represented. Otherwise, right, perhaps it could lead to a hasty generalization. So remember, the criteria, the size must be adequate and the sample must be representative. And what does that mean? It needs to be random and spread. And what happens is a hasty generalization is an unwarranted conclusion. It's a logical fallacy. It's when the sample is clearly too small to warrant such a conclusion. Okay, see that on page 178. 179 gives you the example of the counter examples. With any generalization supported by specific examples, one counterexample can discredit or embarrass the conclusion. Warranted conclusions must be consistent with the data used in their support and, where necessary, qualified appropriately. Rogerian strategy, the use of qualifiers, words like most, some, usually, occasionally, in most cases, instead of all, always, definitely, things like that. Okay, so the counterexample definition on 179 and the square box that explains it that I just read to you is very, very important when you're thinking critically about surveys and statistics and arguments, not just that involve words, but could also involve statistics and numbers. As we move forward, leads us into the next group of reading, mistaking correlation for causation. Correlation just means there's a relationship, whereas causation means something's caused something. And be careful with that, because with causation, you don't want to commit the fallacy of false cause or post hoc. Just because something happens before something, you assume it causes it. There has to be a direct causal relationship. Could be a correlation, but there has to be a direct causal relationship. So more on that to come. Stay tuned for that video lecture, as well as our video review of Othello.